that's the type of student I say, okay, you guys, you have something. It's not just talent, right? Of course, the talent is there, but it's also the willpower to commit to doing it. And when you see that willpower, that desire to do it, those are the cases I do want to encourage, right? Because it's not just about having the ability. There are plenty of people that I know that are very talented, but when the going is tough, they're not necessarily willing to tough it out.
Hello, and welcome to the Musician Toolkit, episode number 82. My name is David Lane, and it is great to be with you once again. Hope everyone had a great holiday weekend if you're in America, and a great weekend regardless, no matter where you live. Okay, let me not beat around the bush this week. I want to go ahead and tell you about today's episode, the interview that I'm going to be sharing in just a moment. It's one that I'm really excited to share, and I can't say that this happens too often. Most of the time when I interview a guest, I have a pretty good idea of exactly what we're going to talk about. Now, I don't know exactly what the guest is going to say, so there's going to be some surprises as far as that goes. But as far as what we're talking about, the overall subject, there's very few surprises when I interview a typical guest. But my guest today is Dr. Larry Weng. He is a piano teacher. He is actually a professor and the head of the piano department at Wake Forest University. He also has a chamber group that we'll talk about toward the end of the episode called the Icarus Quartet. But I invited Larry to have a chat with me for this episode based on a lecture that he gave to a local organization of piano teachers early last year about problem solving in the practice room. And indeed, that is one of the things that we talk about. But our conversation had a really free flow to it, and we talked about so many things. We actually start off talking about technology, and we also talk about philosophies of memorization. We discuss the question, should you major in music if you're a high schooler and you're thinking about going to college? Should you major in music, or should you just keep up your music and major in something else? He has a great story of someone who decided to get really serious as a student when he was already past the age of 40. We talk about the complexities of a music career. And then we do talk about problem solving. We talk about specifically, like if you're having memory slips when you're playing, how to diagnose what's really going on. We talk about the importance of becoming your own teacher, having intrinsic energy and motivation as a performer. And then before we wrap up, we have a little problem solving 101 session. Like, what are the things that you can do to solve your own problems when you're practicing, to figure out what's really going on? So again, this is just a great conversation. So let's go ahead and get to it. This was my chat recently that I had with Dr. Larry Weng. Larry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So, we met in person. It's almost a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, actually. So right when I was starting this podcast, and you were talking about your talk that I heard was about problem solving, and for as far as like practicing and all that. And that has actually been a big topic on this podcast. I've done a lot of solo episodes, and I thought it would be wonderful to get another person's perspective, someone who's spent some time thinking about how to practice and how to diagnose practice issues. But I did, I was at Wake Forest recently. I attended the 2-night event of all the Prokofiev sonatas that were performed, and was it Utek Kim's?
Untek, yes. Yeah, Untek. He's
Untek.
Very old friend of mine. We go back to, we met when we were both 11, I think.
Right.
So preparing for a competition. So
right. I had one of my students come there to I couldn't get anybody there to the first night, but I got him to come the second night. And it might have been a little overwhelming for him. It's like Prokofiev in small doses is an acquired taste, but in large doses.
Yeah, it's tough. It's hard to, and that's what Intech told me before he came. And this has been a project that he's thought about doing for years, and he emailed me saying, "Oh, are you sure it's okay? It's a big ask of the audience. It is. It's a very it's thorny." Sometimes cantankerous music, but there's a lot of really fantastic things in there. But yes, the nine sonatas all in a row, it's a big ask.
Right. But, I mean, for me, a lifelong Prokofiev fan, it was great. But I thought it was very interesting, just having my student there, because one of the things I'm of that old school traditional upbringing, that when I started teaching, I used to tell my students, you have to memorize everything. It's like everything has to be from memory. And obviously, Untic is showing an example of where it's okay to have the music in front of you, especially if you're doing something, a really big project like that.
Right.
I was actually distracted the first night because, he had the iPad up there, but he didn't have a foot pedal and he wasn't turning the page. So it's like he obviously had an app that did like facial recognition, I assume.
No, actually, it's more for him. He's just beginning to tour this project, so for him, it was more of a comfort than anything.
Oh, okay.
There was just certain. And I've noticed this too. When I played, when I did the Clara Schumann concerto with the Wake Forest Symphony Orchestra, it was more of a comfort than anything than anything else to have it up there, especially when you have 4 hours of music, very very thorny music to get through. So
okay,
and that's kind of why you had it up there. Yeah.
Okay, because I did notice that like he did have the type of page turn where it shows like half of the previous page at the top and all that. Right. So, but I didn't know. I know that Fourscore has a pro subscription, and you could train it to turn the page based on certain whatever facial gesture you choose, like a wink or moving the lips or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, technology has come a long way. It's a little bit frightening.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I when I do chamber music, I exclusively play from a tablet. It's made life in so many ways so much easier. I don't have to lug around a gigantic binder full of music, and you don't have to worry about a page turner and being on the same page literally with them. So it does make things a lot easier, but it is slightly frightening that this ability to watch us and learn our gestures it's a little unsettling.
Yeah. It's actually only been 3 years that I've been using like Fourscore kind of regularly, and it was just because, well, actually, I guess 4 years now. It's like time flies by. But during 2020, during the pandemic, there was a few theaters doing some outdoor shows, and we had to do it outdoors if we were going to do it at all. And I'm like, this was the month of August, and there was just no way I was going to chance doing a 2-hour show with wind and all that. It's like, and at night and different lightings. Yep. I'm like, there's just too many things that can go wrong here. Let's get something that is weatherproof.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it just shows that there's a lot of ways to be flexible. I still, if I can play something from memory, I will. If it's by myself. But if I'm playing with anybody else, it's just too risky not to. There's just too many things can come up that, especially if your memory is linear, now we've got, a variable thrown in, and, so I will have that out and so forth. But if I can play it from memory, it's just I can watch my hands, I can let my mind go elsewhere and so forth. It's just so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Freeing. I mean, I always encourage students. This was encouraged to me when I was a college student. When I asked my professor at Juilliard, "Hey, how do I learn things more efficiently?" for lack of a better word, and at that time, he kind of walked me through the process, and essentially, it is that you memorize as you go. So you break down the piece phrase by phrase, and as I learn, I memorize. I don't leave it for a process later. Like there's no learning and then memorizing. The memorizing or the knowing, as I call it, the knowing of the music, it happens on the spot. And so that by the time you get to the end of the piece, the idea is that you should be able to play it. You should be able to perform it. Like it might not be great, but like you should be able to perform by the time you get done. That's the ideal. So
And that's been my experience too. It's like if when I learn something new, I, I'm not trying to memorize it. I just find that that's kind of a natural part of the
yeah,
process and so forth. But
yeah.
y- this wasn't actually on one of my intended talks, but I like throwing this by people. It's a theory that I've noticed as a teacher. Just wonder if it's the same thing. Because when I was in college, I was my freshman year. I was the natural, could play anything by ear, could memorize really well, but I could not sight read well. I had to work on that. There was another student that could sight read almost at her performance level, but she was terrified of the idea of memorizing, and didn't playing by ear was not a strong suit. And what I kind of discovered is just thinking about that and also looking at like students' natural tendencies, like what's the natural strength. It's if the eyes are on the sheet music more than the hands, they'll probably become a better sight reader more naturally and maybe struggle with memorization. But if their eyes more naturally go to watching what their hands are doing, I feel like there's a thought of like we're thinking about the senses and of touch and all that, and then we're going to connect memorization easier than we are sight reading because we're not looking at the music, and so forth.
Right.
But so I feel like for me, trying to learn where the eyes go as a process, it goes from sight reading to memorization. It's like at first we've got to get our eyes up here, but gradually our eyes should wander, should like pay more attention to what's going on and so forth. So you may say some of that, so I don't want to give too much away. Before we talk about specific problem solving, let's give us just a brief biography of yourself as a musician, just kind of, wherever you want to start. You don't have to start at the very beginning unless you want to, but like, I guess at what point did you know that it was something that you wanted to pursue professionally, and just, what was your kind of path to getting to where you are now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it is a little different. I was one of the ones who stalled out the decision as kind of as long as I could. So during college I did the Columbia Juilliard exchange program. So I kind of tried to have the best of both worlds, to be able to get my liberal arts education and also study music, which was it was brutal. It was a lot of work, but given the opportunity again, I still do it. So
Right.
There's a lot that I gained from it, and so especially now working with so many liberal arts students at Wake, it gives me a good insight about where their minds are at, because that was me many years ago. But I remember specifically. This is one of those funny things that doesn't ever go away. Which is, I remember the specific moment where I decided, yeah, I think I'm done with economics. That was my major in college. It was during a senior seminar. I was preparing doing a case study on some World Trade Organization case study, and I was just reading through reams and reams of legal type, and my eyes were glazing over. And I decided, yeah, no, I'm never doing this again. This is it. I'm done. And there was just that definitive moment where I thought to myself, yeah, you know what? Once I get through this, it's going to be full steam ahead for the music. That's not to say that before at that point I wasn't committed to it, but there was still that inkling in my mind being like, oh, am I going to do this? Am I, is this going to be the career path? So at that point, it was it worked out timing wise pretty well. It was right before I started my master's at Juilliard. So that's how the joint program works, is that you spend 3 years in residency at Columbia while taking lessons and doing performance activities at Juilliard. And then the last 2 years are your master's program at Juilliard. So it's a 5-year program. And then at that point, just kind of things took off, and I just jumped right into it. But I mean, ever since I was young, I performed a lot. I competed a lot. I did a lot of things that took me places and forced me to really kind of interact with artists and pianists and musicians from all over the world, which, gave me a lot of perspective. And so by the time I was ready to really jump into it and exclusively do music, I was already kind of there. So from that point on, I went to Yale for my artist diploma, and I also did my DMA there. and a lot of competing, a lot of performing, and a couple of years ago, I ended up here at Wake. So that's a little bit
Nice.
about me.
Just out of curiosity, are all of your students at Wake Forest? Are they all college or grad students, or do you teach any like outside of the campus?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I teach. My job at Wake is all college students. I've had one or two grad students in different programs, but it's mostly undergraduate students, and then I also have private students that I've kept over the years. That's one of the things that COVID was horrible in so many ways, but this transition into the online, teaching and having the setup and having all this stuff it made it possible for me to keep a lot of the students that I had in New York, and a lot of people dispersed. I mean, I had students in Vancouver, I have students in San Francisco. So they're kind of all over the place, but I've been able to keep a bunch of my private students, so I still teach them as well.
Nice. The reason I was asking is, I figured if you had nothing but students at Wake Forest, then this next question would make sense because you'd be teaching all music majors most likely, or people who've already decided on their major, I should say. But the question I guess I was looking for, especially like when someone's in high school or even, middle school when they're taking, and a lot of times you start as a teacher, I'm kind of wondering, when should I encourage and when should I discourage them to be a music major? Because I feel like it's a little irresponsible to be neutral in that. And so, like, what are, I guess, because I've certainly, and I'm sure I'm not alone on this, as someone who, majored in music. I never got my doctorate, but I got my master's, bachelor and master in music. And my track was as a composer, so there are composition degrees. But I have certainly thought over the years, until I got old enough to realize you can't change the past, should I have majored in something else? And because, economics changes, it's like, but it certainly is not the easiest thing to sustain yourself,
Right.
as a musician. And depending on, like, traditional tracks are getting harder. It's getting harder
absolutely.
to become a tenured professor and so forth. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but the musicians who are succeeding more are coming up with, unorthodox paths to success. So I guess, what are some signs that you look for in a student to decide whether or not they should really go all in and major in music?
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? Because there is, as educators, we do have this responsibility. It's absolutely a responsibility to kind of look out for the student and the well-being of their future. And it's a difficult one because there are I've had to have these tough conversations with people being like, this might not be right for you. Right. Now, the question is, what is their specific goal in music?
Yeah.
Right. Because, like the Robert Schumann advice is not everybody can be concert master. And if everybody wanted to be concert master, then we wouldn't have an orchestra. Understanding our place in the music world, or finding our niche, is the more accurate way of putting it, is helpful. If there's a reasonable expectation or understanding of what it's like to in the professional world, and a burning desire to do it, mostly of the times those people, like, I'll give you a story, this is a really fascinating story. He's a student of mine in New York. He came to me when he was 40, and he had been working at IBM for 20 years, and he decided, no, I'm done with this. But he had music in his life before that. He was an organist, in fact, in college. But then after that, he stepped away from music for a long time and came back and decided, you know what, I want to be a musician. I'm like, okay, let's have this conversation. All right, it's going to be, if you really want to do this, it's going to be really, really difficult. If you think you're going to be performing or like traveling the world, that's probably not going to happen. If you want to make it work, you might be able to find something where you can, teach or, work at an organization, but it's not going to be what you might think it is. And he said, that's fine. That's not my purpose in doing this. And So I said, okay, well, if that's the case and you do what I ask you to do, then it's going to be a lot of practicing. You're going to be practicing like full-time job, like, 7 to 9 hours a day. And he said, okay. And in the course of, what was it, 3 to 5 years, I think it was 3 to 5 years, he managed to get himself into a graduate program and in piano. He graduated from that and is now, he has a job as a music director at a church, and he teaches as well. And so, is he the best pianist? No. But the fact is, he found a way to make it work, and he loves doing it. Right. And so that's one example. It's a real fringe case. It's a kind of amazing. He really dedicated himself to doing this. But like, for example, I had another student, 11-year-old girl, fantastically talented, is playing like Ravel Sonatine, Haydn sonatas, Mozart concerti, fantastically talented. Was traveling from Blacksburg to come take lessons every weekend with me. And this is the type of student, she very obviously wants to do it, because when I teach her, you can tell there's nobody prompting.
Right.
Her parents are not asking her to do this. She's asking questions. She'll email me and be like, hey, what about this and stuff like this. And is now at Peabody Prep. That's the type of student that say, okay, you guys, you have something. It's not just talent, right? Of course, the talent is there, but it's also the willpower to commit to doing it.
Right.
And when you see that willpower, that desire to do it, those are the cases I do want to encourage, right? Because it's not just about having the ability. There are plenty of people that I know that are very talented, but when the going is tough, they're not necessarily willing to tough it out. And a lot of making a career in music is that. The real talk is that there is a lot of toughing it out, trying to figure out what that niche is. How am I going to make this music career work for me? And it's not the easiest. It's not a straight path. It's not like med school. It's not like being a doctor, right? That's a very, very straight, prescribed path. I always tell my better students, music is kind of a weird obsession that we some cobble together a career around. Mm-hmm. It's not really a career path. And if you want to go into this, just like Lowenfeld told me when I first came to Juilliard, he said, hey, if you're in this to be rich and famous or to be playing Carnegie every year, get out. It's not going to happen. It's not, and it's not said to be mean. It's not said to say, oh, you can't do this, but it's so many of the factors that go into it are beyond your control. They're beyond your talent. They're beyond your ability.
Right.
And there's an acceptance of that I think a lot, as responsible educators, we have to make them aware of that. And right. It's so this idea that failure is somehow, well, not even failure, maybe not getting the things that you want to get is somehow indicative of a lack of effort or talent is not always true.
Right. Well, and also it's like if you look at what makes someone accomplished musician, like, an expert at their instrument, and if you look at what makes someone rich and famous, it's like you can put those on the same graph, but they're two different points, and a lot of it has to do with business acumen, as well as just opportunities. And that's, I would say, I don't know of anybody who has become rich and successful at music that has no skill whatsoever. It's like there's always there's always something involved in there. So I give pushback when people say, like, you can be, you don't even have to have any talent. No, you do.
No, absolutely. There's definitely ability has to be there, right. But ability alone is not enough. Is really the key here.
Yes.
Like just basic ability. I have so many colleagues who are incredibly able. They're very capable people, and any single one of them could play at Carnegie, and it'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. But they don't get that opportunity, and that's just the truth of the situation. This is a winner-take-all economy. Right? We don't need that many Barenboims. We don't need that many pariahs. Yeah. There's just not the demand nor the capacity to fulfill that. And so understanding that and finding a fulfilling career in your own way is really important. And it's an important thing that I wish was encouraged and taught in conservatories a little bit sooner.
Yeah, this is great. This is, that's why I love talking to a lot of guests, because I never know exactly where the conversation is going to go. But I haven't really had this particular conversation, but you just mentioned Carnegie Hall. I think it's time to revisit that whole statement of, how do you get, the joke is, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Well, we got to rewrite that. Practice, 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 plus network a lot.
That's right.
Plus develop yourself as a brand. And there's so many things that go into that. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do have a student, I think he just turned 13. He's very ambitious as far as repertoire. He just learned the Chopin Fantasy Impromptu. But absolutely no desire for any kind of competition or performance. And he has a passion for, he already knows he wants to study aviation engineering. And I'm like, I am not going to discourage you from that. That is something you should do. And I'm a big fan of using Borodin as kind of like a poster child for someone who can have a day job as something other than a musician. He was a chemist and still come up with music that we still play today. It's like,
right. And another example of that is Charles Ives.
Oh yes,
Bond salesman. Right.
And in his case, revolutionary music. So
right. Yeah. I mean, it is like I have, like going back a little bit about my students at Wake. I mean, to be honest, most of them are not music majors. That's one of the interesting thing about what I get to do is that a lot of them, like one of my best students who recently just graduated, pre-med. Mm-hmm. In fact, two of them pre-med. Another one going to Cornell Law. Another one going to Chicago Law. They're very serious musicians. Mm-hmm. So they're going to have that music with them for the rest of their lives. And in some ways, not to say that I don't appreciate working with professional students. I absolutely love working with professional students because I feel like those are the students I can offer the most to. But there's something really worthwhile because guess what? Those people, they're going to be our audiences in the future. Those are the people that are going to support the arts. Those are the people who are going to have the means and the willpower to be the donors, to be the audience members, right? And those things are really important, cultivating that audience, because this is like the perpetual issue with classical music, right? You go to a concert and 90% of the people there are over 70.
Right. And that's a good point, but also, kind of another point is if you're still studying music as someone over 18, but it's not your career, I think there must be more of just a joy and a passion and enjoyment there, because there's a danger when you're trying to do it as a full-time job that it becomes just that. And it's like, and that's a challenge, I think, for professionals, is to keep this something that you really enjoy doing.
Absolutely. That is a hard one.
Well, let's pivot into the idea of, something I talk a lot about on here is kind of practice strategy. And you have a term that you use called problem solving in the practice room. It's an actual, kind of lecture that you've given before. So I think let's get into this. And I was going to just kind of talk about it general sense, but I really think it kind of speaks for itself. We're solving, for some difficulties. So let's start with, you gave me a couple scenarios before we recorded. Let me ask you about, like, if someone's having memory slips and you problem solving for that. Walk us through, like, someone's, like, they thought they had it memorized, but now they're having trouble with it. So that's a problem. So how would we solve for that?
Right. So how they have their memory slip also, right? Like that's one of the key tells there is how are they having the memory slip? Which hand derails first? Is it an inner voice? Is a fingering issue, right? By watching how the student is playing, and the thing is, I'm not giving them these answers,
right?
And this is why my students get very frustrated with me. They when the questions come out, they know they're in trouble. But that's what I'm looking for, right? When I'm diagnosing the problem, I'm saying what caused. It's like a forensic scientist. What caused the accident, right? Or is it just, if you know the student, it tends to be the nervous type, I might have them do it 3-4 more times, right? And say, okay, it's on a balance of probability. Is this just them being nervous, or is this actually a deficit in knowledge or understanding of what's going on in that section, right? But if it's someone like I have students who are not super nervous people, confident people, and when they have a memory slip, it really does say something, right? And so it's like, oh, okay, can they understand what happened? And after years of me kind of asking them, interrogating them in this way, they start to learn, okay, I need to be able to go through a decision tree, if you will. And this is kind of how I always talk about things, is that whenever you're practicing, whenever you're approaching something, imagine it like a fork in the road, right? Which path am I going to take, right? I have to figure out which path is the problem, and I have to take that path. You don't avoid the problem. So, say, for example, okay, well, which hand derailed? Your left hand. It's almost always the left hand. It's almost always the left hand, right? It's like 90% the left hand. And then it's also like 90% the inner voice, right? So, you start to see these patterns, but students, when the first time they're asked this, they have no idea, because when the problem happens, it's just kind of, disaster, right?
Right.
But once you start talking to them and start being able to have them interrogate what happened, and they start being able to answer these questions. Oh, okay, it's my left hand. My left hand derailed first, and it brought the right hand with it. All right. Well, what does that say about your left hand? Okay, maybe you don't really know the passage here. Can you play it by itself? Well, if you can't play it by itself, that means you're relying on some kind of coordination with the right hand, right? So what at this point we've decided, okay, your left hand is the issue in these 4 bars. How can we solve it, right? What's the decision here? There's some basic principles that I have scattered around the room with very angry text that they can choose, right? The first of which is always to reduce variables, right? You always want to reduce your variables. And these are all very intelligent kids, so I can talk to them this way and say, okay, think about it like you're doing multivariate calculus. You have to isolate your variables. You have to create a matrix. You have to understand which one am I solving for. You can't solve for X, Y, and Z all at the same time. It doesn't work, right? Because one of those variables changing is going to mess up everything else. So let's isolate, right? Okay, so it's the left hand. What do we decide? Oh, okay, well, we're just going to play the left hand by itself. We're playing something with multiple voices. Which voice is it? Is it your alto voice? Is it your tenor voice? Is it your bass voice? Which one is causing the problems? Oh, did you use the same fingering? Oh, maybe it's a fingering problem. This happens a lot. I've been seeing this a lot, which is, for some reason, students don't like to write down fingerings. And for those that do write down fingerings, they still don't use them.
Right.
It's like, you wrote down this thing like I asked you, but if you're not going to use the fingering, you've done nothing. You've just written something on a piece of paper, right? So if it's basic things like that, the problem might just solve itself. Okay, then we can just take the off-ramp. We've just solved the problem. But if it's not, okay, what about this passage is causing you problems? Oh, yeah, you don't know what the harmony is behind this bass line. That would help.
Right.
Right? Understanding where you are in the progression. That would help. If you know that you're near dominant, you're not going to be playing certain notes. There's not that many choices. Like, at the end of the day, when you start simplifying and saying, oh, okay, I'm playing a tonal piece. Okay, I'm getting near a cadence. Well, there's not that many notes it could possibly be.
Right.
Right? So when we simplify it that way, it's much easier for the brain to latch onto, saying, oh, okay, I don't have to just pick up these notes from scratch. I know what came before. Oh, and I'm going to a dominant. Oh, I'm in G major. It's probably a D or F sharp. Okay, that makes it a lot easier, right? Because now I have 2 choices instead of 12. It's not that hard, right? Removing a lot of these kind of different distractions to what the actual problem is, and honing in and saying, oh, okay, I didn't know that was a dominant. Now that I know it's a dominant, the problem's not happening again. Okay, off ramp. Or, oh, there's a middle voice that I'm just not paying attention to. My thumb is just kind of doing its own thing. That happens a lot, right? So now we play that by itself. And once you're able to play that from memory, we put it back in. And then we add another thing. And then we see if we solved that problem, right? Understanding, it's almost like a car mechanic or a surgeon, right? If I'm testing the part, is it holding charge? Is there voltage coming off of it? Okay, it's living again? All right, let's put it back in the car and run it, right? And through that iterative process, I can eliminate more and more things. until if they haven't found the problem yet, then you can just keep on eliminating things until they do. And of course, not every problem is going to be that simple. But if it is like a memory issue, it sometimes, most of the times, is that there is something that the brain is not super clear on, right? And this is why I tend to like to use the word, do you know the music?
Right.
What's going on here? Can you tell me? And some of them don't have maybe the conservatory training to be able to tell me, okay, this is a 265, right? Or we're doing a 164 cadential 6/4 chord or something like this. But they might know we're getting to the end of the phrase, right? What scale degrees? Scale degrees are always great because there's only 7 of them. It's not you can always think about scale degrees, right? And after you play enough tonal music, you start to see the patterns. 1 4 5 6, 1 4 5 1, 1 2 5 1. You see the patterns in the bass, right? And it's all, again, almost always middle voices, almost always left hand, right? The things that are, I hate to put it this way, but the periphery of a lot of students' attentions.
Yes.
Right. And so this is a thing that a lot of how we interact with stuff has to do with our physiology and how the human body works, right? And this is an example that I give all the time to students, which is that there's only a very small, narrow band of our vision that is in HD. Mm-hmm. So it's like I think it's 6 degrees within. So like just kind of the center of our field of vision that's actually in HD. Meaning the thing that we focus on, the thing that we're looking at, we have very good awareness of what that thing is, right? But I put an object over here, I would challenge a lot of people to even be able to tell me what shape it is. And so this is a big issue, and this is kind of how we interact with stuff, and this is why this kind of breaking things down to its parts and removing variables and simplifying works so well, because we can only focus on so many things at once.
Right.
And we can only see so many things in really high detail. And what do you know? Most students just don't see everything in high detail. They look at the music as a monolithic whole. This is, okay, this is the piece. I need to make it better. Well, yeah, making it better, and that's like, well, I know where Mars is, mm-hmm. right? And I know how I know how combustion engine works. And I know how rockets work. Does that mean I can go to Mars?
No.
I mean, just because, right, exactly. It's just because you know what the final goal is. It's not helping you. It's not helping you get there. So being on that decision tree, being it's like, okay, I know I need to make it better. Let's just shove that for now. But I need to diagnose the problem first, right? So that accurate diagnosis, I find, almost always solves the majority of the problems. There'll be that fringe case where it's like they don't have the tool for that. Oh, okay. Now we're into the weeds about like, how do I give them that tool, right? Oh, they don't have the right fingering. Oh, they don't know how to do X, Y, and Z technical thing. Or, oh, they don't have maybe the theory to understand what's going on here, right? And then you can really kind of dive into those issues, those toolbox, those things that they need in their toolbox, so that when they come back or they go to another piece, and inevitably they'll encounter the same problem again, they'll be able to constructively apply what it is that tool that you learned in this piece, right? It is always kind of this idea of having that toolbox. What tool can I pull out at what juncture in this road that's going to make this situation better?
That's for better or worse, is what I have to go through. Like on a simple scenario, if I plug my keyboard into an amp and I don't get a sound, it's like, well, okay, so let me plug my headphones in the keyboard and make sure if I hear a sound, then it's a problem with the amp.
right.
Or it's a problem with the cable. I could try a different cable, know, and if that's still a problem, then it's a problem with the amp, so then we start doing things with the amp. This is, I'm glad you said car mechanics and all that, because that's exactly what they do all the time. You bring in, there's a funny sound it's making, or actually, I mean, one of the things I'm delaying it just because the finances are not, it's summer, it's not exactly where I want it to be, but it shakes a little bit going in second gear. So it's like, that could be something small, could be something big. And it's like, well, I'm willing to wait until it's a problem before I see what it is. But I know that, but they've already, I already know kind of like the 2 or 3 things it could be and how they would figure that out. On a more major issue that I go through with technology, though, is like on this computer, if I'm loading up a virtual sound or if I have a problem with that, it's a lot of things you have to go through. It's like you have to, sometimes you have to make sure that your operating system's up to date. And of course,
drivers, right?
Yeah, and of course, my favorite, one of my favorite sitcoms of all time is the IT Crowd, and of course, the opening line of that is the guy answers the phone. Says, "Hello, this is IT. Have you tried turning it on and off again, or off and on?"
Yeah,
and that is, that solves about half the things,
half the problems, right?
Right. But yeah, the other thing is, this whole idea of asking questions, just because I do encourage people to think about like how they're teaching and all that as well. And I think it makes for harder teaching, but it's more effective teaching, and that is asking questions. What is the ultimate goal? It's that they can teach themselves. It's like they can solve their own problems, and so you're training them to ask questions, which is ultimately what we have to do when we're practicing without a teacher. Is like, okay, what would a teacher do here?
Right. Yeah. That's something that I say all the time. It's like, if you need that as a crutch, just imagine me yelling in the back of your ear. Right. Yeah. That's fine. But eventually, the idea is that you replace me. Mm-hmm. That's my job. My whole job is to make myself obsolete.
Right.
You don't want students to rely on you, which is hard. Which is hard because, the comment I get most from students is, it seems so simple when you lay it out like this, when you guide me through it. I'm like, yeah, it seems simple because I've seen this problem like 15,000 times.
Right.
It seems simple when the surgeon is just opening a person up and cutting out the cancer. It seems simple because they've done it that many times. That's what skill is supposed to look like. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to look simple, right? It's supposed to look easy. It's not, of course, it's not easy when you do it. But guess what? You're a neophyte. You just started. It's okay.
Yes.
Right? You can't expect it to look the same way. And in your problem solving, it's not going to be so clean. It's not going to be so surgical. And that's okay. You got to start somewhere. You can't say, I'm taking the circuitous path, so I don't want to do it. No, you got to figure it out. And then every time you do it again, your path's going to be a little bit more efficient. It's going to be a little bit more straight, direct to the point.
Right. One thing I didn't hear in there, just talking about like memory slips, but I guess it's an obvious question to ask. What were you thinking at the time? Were you thinking about the music, or were you thinking about what am I having for lunch? Or, because that could be as simple as that. Because I know that for me, when I've had memory slips before, a lot of times that's it. It's like I remember I gave a kind of an independent recital. And I played through, I guess it was Beethoven's Pathetique. I did the whole, all three movements, and I was feeling pretty good about myself after that performance. And I think I was probably about 25 or 26 at the time, and I was not one of those people that was very mature for that age. Yeah. I got more mature in my 30s, I guess. But I started thinking about one of the audience members. It's like, I wonder what I look like from their perspective as I was playing. It's like, it's just a little egotistical thing that happened. And immediately I realized I wasn't focusing on my playing, and I was on my next piece, which I think was, Juba from Dancing the Bottoms by our Nathaniel Dett, a little showy piece that I'd play that was supposed to be one of the less challenging pieces on the program, but I was doing a horrible performance as soon as I brought my attention back to it, and it's just you can't, your mind can't wander everywhere. That's why you videotape things, so you can go back and enjoy it, at that point. But you have to be in the moment, and you can't be like everywhere around the room.
It is, and for students, this is really it's a hard thing, and that's why performance is so important, because you don't necessarily encounter all those problems in the practice room, and you don't necessarily encounter all those problems during your lesson. Now, yeah, sure, I make my students nervous, but it's different when you're in front of 20, 30, 40 people than it is one, no matter who it is. Mm-hmm. And that issue of helping people find flow is especially difficult in this generation. And I just find kids these days are much more distracted and have much shorter dopamine cycles. And it's, it is a product of the times and the technology that we have. It's everywhere, right? So the more instant gratification and the more easy, flashy things that they have, the shorter their ability to delay gratification or focus towards a goal is. And it's a thing that we talk about a lot in higher education because we see it all over the place. Students are less capable of writing prose. They're less capable of making complex arguments. They're less capable of giving talks that are coherent. Mm-hmm. And they're less capable of even reading longer, more thorny passages or chapters or text. It's a hard thing. And so in that sense, learning an instrument or learning a skill, it's an incredible tactile reminder to them, A, how difficult it is just to focus, just to do the thing, but also that these skills are transferable. Right? I'm constantly writing recommendations for kids who are going to be lawyers, going to be med school students, going to be X, Y, and Z, right? MBAs. And I have to always include in there, why am I writing this recommendation? Mm-hmm. I'm their music professor. But as someone who's done something else like that, the transferability of all those skills and all those qualities is incredible, right? Mm-hmm. The ability to focus, the ability to find flow, the ability to deductively problem solve. These are all incredibly foundational skills that they're going to need in any discipline. And so few things in life these days encourage and force you to confront that every day in and day out, as you practice, as you perform. It's constantly these skills that you have to develop being a musician, and it's incredibly character building. Right, so it is a finding that flow and just being locked in. It's so difficult and it's so rare. But then the thing is, when students get it, they really understand it, and they really appreciate it.
I think another mindset thing, I would have been interested in, I didn't get a chance to talk to Yuntik after the Prokofiev, either of the nights, but something that's that niche on a Monday and Tuesday night, is obviously not going to draw a huge crowd. And it was, a whole lot of empty seats there, unfortunately. But it's one of those things that it might have been ideal if you'd had, one of those recital halls where you could seat like 40 or 50 people or something like that.
Absolutely.
But when you have one of all those empty seats, on there, I think there's a type of performer that might be comforted in that. Oh, good, there's not that many people here. I know for me, it's harder to focus. Because I was in the audience, he might be thinking there's that individual bald guy, that's over here. And, instead of a sea of people that, where the audience becomes kind of like just part of an energy delivery system, something like that. But I imagine for each person that is different. It's like, and that's part of performing. It's that, figuring out kind of what drives you, but also learning how to do it intrinsically so that the audience doesn't matter either way.
Absolutely. It's definitely not easy. I mean, like for me, it's always, I experience the same thing because the audience, it is a live thing, right? The audience is an intrinsic part of what you're doing because otherwise we can just be recording and have a lot more perfection, if you will. The audience, then that energy and that response they give is important. So it's very, at least for me, it's very always easy and always immediate. I can feel the energy that the audience is giving back. And when you feel that the audience is with you, they're hanging on a phrase, they're listening, they're anticipating. You feel all those things on the stage. And so when you don't have as many people, especially in a big hall, when it feels cavernous, it is difficult. But that is one of the things about being a professional. No matter what, you have to do your job, right? And there's a really interesting. I always come back to this quote from Leon Fleischer. You say that when students get nervous before performances, he said, "What time do you have to be nervous? You have so many things to think about. There's so much in the music. Like You don't have time to be nervous.
Right.
Get your mind on the right thing, right?
Right. So I guess just to kind of put a ribbon on this idea, we use the specific example if there's a memory slip. Each situation's different, but let's just say a student is by themselves, and they're practicing, or they moved on from you, and of course,
Right.
and they're working on, and I know that I'm a composer who plays piano. You are a piano professor. So our listeners, for this podcast, are instrumentalists of all type. So it's going to be specific, different for their specific instruments. Where does it begin? I guess what is just in general, it's do you have kind of what's a first question you ask yourself in any situation? I guess, do you start off with, is it physical or mental today? I guess, is that a good first starting point?
I think even before that, I would ask what went wrong.
Yes.
What the thing itself, and this is a shockingly difficult question for so many people, because we're not so good. And this is why it's hard, this being aware while we're doing and being aware, doing and listening, doing and observing. Observe, that word is, I have a huge, it's written all over my studio, is being observational, being observant while you're doing a thing is very difficult. It involves a lot of awareness and the wherewithal to be able to do that thing, right? So answering that question, just answering, hey, what went wrong?
Right.
Very specifically, not just, I didn't play it well. Oh, I stopped. That's not helpful. Being as specific as possible, delving in and being able to give a shape to the issue, right? Once you give your opposition shape and form and boundaries, it becomes much easier to tackle, because it's not this nebulous void of bad in front of you. Oh, I didn't do it well, right? There's this conquering of this immediate negativity. No, it wasn't good. Yeah, okay, that's fine. We can acknowledge that and move on. I don't want to dwell on this I didn't do it well. What did you not like about it, right? What was not the way that you wanted to do it? What would have been the way you wanted to do it? And then when you start asking these questions, it becomes much easier to say, oh, wait, was I not in today? Was I thinking about something else? Was I not focused? Or, oh, am I not using the finger that I wrote? Or, oh, do I not know my inner voices? Or, oh, am I not warmed up and my hands are just janky right now? Right? It becomes much easier to answer those questions when that problem is so bounded in front of you and it's very finite.
Yeah.
Right. And we tend not to the human brain tends not to do well with the infinite or the undefined.
Right.
Ambiguity is not a strength of our abilities.
Right. Yeah. And to kind of bringing it back, you talked about, you said calculus. Calculus is beyond what I study. but I do, it is true, and many people have said this, that there's a lot of correlation, a lot of similarity between math and music. One of the things that I say all the time is, unlike if you study something like what happened in this country in the year 1637,
right.
It's unless you study that further and keeps doing that information will go away, but it won't impact anything else that you study. Whereas I say, as soon as you learn 2 times 3 = 6, you're going to continue to find use for that as you continue throughout your life. It's you'll find use for that constantly. So it's a cumulative, even if you add things to it. And I said, as soon as we study basic rhythm and basic notes, it's that's never going to go away. No matter how advanced you get in music, you're going to continue to find a use for that knowledge. And music is constantly building on itself. You start off with the most basic things, but those basics are something you always have to know.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the case with most skills, right?
Right.
And with most skills, it's always this way. And so this is I always like finding throughputs with other subjects, because it's something that, I as much of a musician as I am, the world is a very beautiful and interesting place. There's just so many things out there. I'm just fascinated by all sorts of stuff. And, a hobby of mine is combat sports. So I train Muay Thai. And it's fascinating to come back to it, which is that there's very similar throughputs here. No matter how fancy the stuff you're doing, the things that win fights are the basics. Like you always have to have basic good stance, good footwork, your basic 1-2. Like those things are the building blocks of everything else, right? No matter, and it's that exact same idea. No matter how advanced, right? No matter what kind of crazy polyrhythm I'm doing, or any crazy hocketing that I'm doing, that basic ability to put things on the beat or off the beat, it's still the same.
Yep. Exactly.
It's still the same. That ability to subdivide, still the same. It's just there's more steps to it now, nice. Right? So all these things, those basic competencies, and the issue a lot of times is that basic competencies are hard to work on. They're hard to constantly keep sharp. And so because once we get into advanced stuff, we think we've moved past them. Right. And it's really interesting where I'm just like, I'll sometimes do an exercise with my students where I just have them match my tempo as I clap, and I'll speed up and slow down, and they'll realize how hard that is.
Yes.
I'm not even doing any crazy rhythms. I'm just clapping quarter notes in different tempos.
Yep.
And so like that the humility that comes through trying to, you can never say perfect, but better a skill. It really is that reminder that we kind of constantly have to go back to these things and rebuild and sharpen our tools, because at the end of the day, those are the things that are going to propel you forwards. The fancy stuff is they're kind of end goals, right? But it's the basic competencies that you need to build and to perfect. I hate that word perfect. This is just not possible, right? It's kind of a frustrating one. But to make as strong and precise as possible to be able to get to those things that you want to get to.
Right. Yeah, music and music and athletics are two examples of things without a ceiling. It's like you don't have the it's not Mount Everest you're climbing, because there is a peak to Mount Everest. It's going to outer space where there's like you're going further than you have before, but there's still infinity remaining.
Right, and that it's a good metaphor for life.
Yep.
Because if we think about it as conquering that Everest, right? Or that's why when people have really strong goals, it's great. Don't get me wrong, right? But if they've defined everything on reaching that one goal, what comes after that?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. There's no peak. It's just the next mountain.
Yeah.
It's just constant. It's like the Marcus Aurelius. It's not the mountain is not in your way. The mountain is the way.
Right. That's true. Well, this is very fascinating. I could talk all day about so many things that we've talked about, but this idea of just learning how to diagnose your practice, ask questions. This is wonderful. Do you have anything you'd like to share, like where people can follow you or find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find out. Currently a big part of my performance career is a chamber music ensemble called the Icarus Quartet. And it's a 2-piano, 2-percussion ensemble that we do a lot of contemporary music, a lot of commission pieces. We're in fact coming to Winston-Salem, so I think it's September 30th or September 29th in the fall, and we're playing at the Secret Series. We're doing the Bartok 2-piano percussion sonata and 3 commission pieces by Martin Bresnik, Vic Kwong, and Jennifer Higdon that were written for us. And that's kind of the big project on the horizon. But yeah, people can find out more at the Wake Forest Music Department website. They can Google me. I have my own personal website, or the Icarus Quartet website. Those are all places to find me.
Okay, sorry. Could you spell that? Like what quartet it is? I'm sorry.
Icarus, Icarus.
Okay, and what is your website?
It is. I think it's just LarryWengPiano.com.
Okay, excellent. Well, it has been great. It's wonderful chatting with you today. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Yeah, well, thank you, David, for having me.
And that's going to wrap up episode number 82. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this episode. If you have feedback, you'd like to share it with me, you can send me a message. by going to davidlanemusic.com. There's a contact form. Just scroll down a little bit on the home page. You can also, on the upper menu, you can find the other aspects of my website, including the section for the Musician Toolkit, where you can explore all of the past episodes and also subscribe directly to major podcast apps such as Apple, Spotify, and a few others. If you're watching on YouTube, I'd appreciate it if you'd be so kind to click the thumbs up on this. And also, if you have not offered a 5-star rating and review on the app of your choice in a while, that would be something that would be very helpful, just to tell others that this is a podcast that you find worth listening to. And of course, as always, what always helps is if you'll share this episode on your social media or in an email or in a text to someone that you think would get some benefit from this particular episode. So once again, that's going to wrap up today, but I'll be back with you again next week. So until then, thank you so much for listening.